When the first caveman realized he could throw a rock at some dude he didn't like, he probably complained about the type of rock he had to use to his buddies afterwards. Soldiers griping about the type of gear they have to use on the battlefield is a tradition as old as warfare itself, and during a time like World War II when so many new items were being pushed into the hands of soldiers, there were bound to be some stinkers in there. Recently, I shared 5 pieces of gear that soldiers did not like to use during World War II, but if you thought there were only 5 bad pieces of gear made during World War II, then you might have a little too much faith in the US government. You guys gave me some great input after my last video about what you wanted to see in a part 2, so today I'm going to share 5 more items that were hated by the soldiers who had to use them in World War II. I'm lucky enough to have some of the items on this list on hand today so I can demonstrate them for you guys, but as you know, this World War II stuff does not come cheap. So I'd like to take a moment to thank World of Warships for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel so I can make these videos. World of Warships is a free-to-play naval warfare game available on PC with new content released every month. Their latest release lets you take command of the USS Wisconsin. You can command the power of Big Whiskey and enjoy fresh gameplay experiences in World of Warships' stunning 12v12 arenas. World of Warships has more than 40 unique maps with dynamic weather, all of which have been updated with stunning new water effects and textures. That brings a new level of realism to the game. You can conquer the ocean aboard some of history's most iconic battleships, destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and submarines. You can play as a lone wolf or in a division with your friends. Oh, and did I mention the game is also available on console, so you have plenty of options for how to join the action. Download World of Warships today using the first link in the description below. During registration, use the promo code Wisconsin to receive a huge starter pack including 500 doubloons, 2 million credits, 10 days of premium account time, choice of unlocking the Clemson, Phoenix, Wyoming, or Langley after 15 battles, and 2 American Cruisers containers. Thanks again to World of Warships. Now let's get back to the list. Here are 5 more items that many soldiers hated using during World War II. Item number 1, the assault vest. Nowadays, combat vests and chest rigs are very common for militaries around the world, but that really wasn't the case during World War II. US soldiers typically used ammo belts like this with items hanging off of them, or maybe bandoliers, but vests weren't very common. That is until 1944 when the Army issued out large numbers of a new assault vest in preparation for the D-Day invasion. These vests were based off of a British concept, and they were meant to give soldiers more room to carry all the different stuff they would need for an amphibious invasion. The Army found that the standard Haversack just wasn't big enough to carry all the different equipment a soldier might need for a big operation like that, but these new assault vests had plenty of different pockets where soldiers could store all of their grenades, ammunition, food, everything they would need to keep fighting for days on end after an amphibious invasion. And since the assault vest allowed you to have it in pockets instead of all on your back, it was a lot more convenient. Well, not really, but that was the idea. In reality, most soldiers hated these vests, and they had some very good reasons for that. First of all, they had so many pockets and so much room to put stuff in that they ended up being really heavy and bulky. For something intended to be used during an amphibious operation, this is probably the last thing I would ever want to have attached to me when I was thrown into the water. The vest has so many pockets that you're surrounded by heavy stuff and it wraps all the way around you. If you went into the water with that thing on, it would be a serious struggle trying to get it off. The assault vest did have quick release straps on the front so that in theory you could pull it off if you fell into the water, but some soldiers reported that once the straps got wet, the webbing swelled up and it made it impossible to pull the straps off, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of having quick release straps if you can't release them in the situation you need them for. You hear these assault vests referred to by all different names like assault jacket, combat vest, assault jerkin, and even though assault jerkin sounds like something Louis C.K. would do, jerkin is just another word for a vest, so don't be thrown off by that. Here's what one World War II quartermaster report had to say about the assault vest, or as they call it in the report, the battle jerkin. Specific complaints about the jacket for a landing are that it was too long and had too much cargo carrying space. This caused overloading and dissatisfaction with the jerkin. Items carried in the jerkin included ammunition, grenades, rations, raincoats, TNT, toilet articles, and many personal items. Several of the men had to get off of boats in 4 to 5 feet of water, and in jumping into the water, the pockets filled up. Several men were drowned as they could not make it to shore with this heavy load. Large pockets sound like a really good idea for an operation like that, but keep in mind, soldiers will fill up every bit of space that they're given. Sometimes more space really isn't better, and it just leads to soldiers being weighed down and carrying bulky and awkward combat loads. The jackets were also notorious for being extremely hot when you were wearing them. You can see that the canvas on these jackets wraps around you all the way from your shoulders down to your thighs. So if you were moving around with this vest on and you were wearing it over your field jacket and your wool shirt and maybe an undershirt, you would be really warm during the day. The length of the jacket was also a problem. Like I said, it goes almost all the way down to your thighs, and it has those really big pockets all the way at the bottom. That means if you tried to run with this thing on and you had the bottom pockets loaded up, it would be it would be swinging around and banging off of your legs, and it would make it really difficult to move. For that reason, some soldiers actually cut the vests in half. They would cut off the whole lower portion, removing those heavy bottom pockets. The assault vest also had that one large pocket right in the middle of your back, meaning if you wanted to get your stuff out of there, you pretty much had to take the whole thing off to access it. So I've heard stories of some soldiers cutting that off as well. As I mentioned, there were already plenty of pockets to carry everything you needed, so that big one in the back wasn't always necessary. With all those drawbacks, the assault vest really didn't see much use. Some soldiers were issued the vest and ditched it before they ever got on their boats for D-Day. Other soldiers ditched the vests on the beach or shortly after landing, and by just a couple weeks after D-Day, the assault vests were almost entirely abandoned. Unsurprisingly, when the US Marine Corps tested the assault vest to see if it's something they wanted to use, they found it was too heavy, hot, bulky, and just impractical, and decided they did not want to use it. Unlike a lot of other items we'll cover on this list, there really wasn't an improved version or a one-to-one replacement for the assault vest. It seemed like the Army just kind of wanted to get rid of them and forget the entire thing ever happened. Item number 2, the M1928 Haversack. This one could be the entire video right here. There are designs that aren't user-friendly, and then there are designs that are just straight up hostile to the user, and that's the M1928 Haversack. The Haversack was the standard pack used by enlisted men in the US Army for most of World War II, and it made up the majority of packs used by the Army in pretty much every theater of operations. The M1928 Haversack was based on the M1910 Haversack that was used during World War I. The only real change was that they added some straps to keep it from swinging around as much when you're moving, and they made a couple tiny adjustments. But I don't know who looked at the M1910 Haversack, which again I think is just a terrible design, and said, oh, you know what, let's add one more strap to this to go on your belt and then it'll be perfect. If you couldn't tell already, I am a certified Haversack hater, so I might be a little bit biased on this one, but having used them so much at World War II reenactments, I feel I'm qualified to speak on how annoying this thing is. The Haversack was actually a great design on paper. It was super easy to make. The pack doubles as suspenders to hold up your belt, and it was also modular, so it had removable pieces that you could put on or take off depending on what you were doing with the pack. In reality, the design sucks. I don't know who looked at this and said, oh yeah, that's exactly what a soldier wants in their pack. They don't want just a normal bag that they can put objects inside of. They want a flat piece of canvas that they have to lay on the ground and meticulously wrap their items in and strap it closed. The Musette bag was also used during World War II. That one was pretty much designed like a standard bag. It had one large compartment and a flap at the top to close it off, but that pack was really only given to officers and other people with specific jobs. Officers almost always got the best stuff, and I know it isn't true, but sometimes I wonder to myself if they just gave out the Haversack to enlisted men so that officers would seem so special in comparison because they got a normal bag that a human being would design. So let's dig into why some soldiers hated this. I mentioned that the Haversack was modular and that was good on paper, but in practicality, the modularity was kind of unnecessary. I think it was good that it had spaces where you could put on and take off a shovel or a bayonet, but the Haversack had this big pouch on the front that was made to carry your mess tin or meat can. It's called the meat can pouch. But from what I've seen, soldiers pretty much never took that pouch off of the Haversack. If they weren't carrying their mess tin, they would just use that pouch to carry something else. So I don't know why they didn't just build that into the inside of the pack or something. Some soldiers took the meat can pouch off the haversack to just use the meat can pouch, like to put it on their belt or something. But even then, the pouch wasn't designed to be carried on your belt, so you would have to sew it in some way to modify it so that you could actually carry it separate from the haversack. Maybe if they wanted to make it modular, they should have thought of that. The pack also had what's called a pack tail or a diaper that went on the bottom of the pack, and that was used to hold your bedroll. Maybe that made sense to use in training when soldiers are marching around with their gear all rolled up nicely, but it seems like those pack tails were pretty much never used on the battlefield. Instead, soldiers typically rolled up their blankets and just tied them onto the top of their haversack, or made what's called a hobo roll, where you roll everything up and use one of the ropes to sling it over your shoulder. So when soldiers start tying blankets onto their pack, instead of using the feature on the pack that's, you know, specifically designed to carry your blankets, you know you probably have a bad design on your hands. And the worst part of the haversack, in my opinion, the haversack also closes in a very strange way, but it made it so small items could easily fall out of the haversack if you were moving around. And it also meant that to get things out of the bag, you pretty much always had to take the whole thing off, lay it out flat on the ground, and open the entire thing up to get to what you needed, as opposed to, you know, any other bag where you just open the top and then reach in and get what you want. Soldiers in World War II were known for being constantly on the move, and it was a very mobile army, so a pack that you have to take off and lay on the ground every time you need something out of it, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Why don't we do a quick demonstration, and I'll pack and unpack my haversack together with you guys so you can see why I hate it. I'll try not to get too frustrated in the process. Alrighty, let's get started. So I have my haversack here and a bunch of items to put in it. Just keep in mind, this isn't meant to be a demonstration of everything that a soldier would have realistically carried. I just kind of have a smattering of items here to show how you actually pack this thing and use the haversack. So as you can see, I already have my M1943 entrenching tool on here. This goes behind this front part called the meat can pouch, and I have my bayonet on here as well, which clips onto the side. So let's grab our mess tin or meat can and shove that in there. Now, soldiers didn't always carry these. A lot of times on the front lines, soldiers would forego the full meat can there, and instead they would just eat out of their little canteen cup. Let's close that up. Now we're going to fill up the main area of our haversack. And that's pretty much all you could carry, but that's really not much, and we are at capacity. So let's try to even this stuff out. And then what I'll do is take this weird tail part at the bottom, move it up to the top, and then, like I said, try to wrap all these straps around this like an envelope or something. I'm not going to buckle the bottom strap yet, and you'll see why. If I just buckled that bottom strap the way it's meant to be used, my shovel is kind of dangling here, and when I ran with this on my back, my shovel would be flopping around all over the place. So it's very common for soldiers to loop this strap around the shovel, and that keeps it from getting flung all over when you're trying to move. So that is a packed haversack for you. Now, typically this would be clipped onto a soldier's belt, although sometimes instead of clipping the straps to the belt, they would just clip them to themselves so they could wear it like a normal backpack. I mentioned that there was a removable part of this called the pack tail or the diaper, and here that is. It's a very weird looking thing, and it basically dangles off the bottom of the haversack, and again, it's just a piece of canvas with a couple straps attached, and you just secure this around your blanket roll, and that keeps it together. But then if I take my bedroll, you can see how that goes in. So we'll just buckle that one at the top, I guess. This thing sucks. I hate the haversack. The haversack started to be phased out towards the end of World War II due to all the downsides that I've mentioned. The packs that replaced the haversack still weren't perfect, but they did have a lot of improvements, like removable suspenders so you could use suspenders without having the pack on them. That wasn't an option with the Haversack, and some soldiers even ended up cutting the pack off to just use the straps as suspenders. The new packs also had improved systems that could be used to carry blankets and shelter halves. And best of all, in my opinion, they went back to the design of a normal bag with a flap on the top. Not sure why it took them so long to get back to that basic backpack design, but the military has basically been using packs that work with that same basic method ever since. There is one thing I really think they got right with the Haversack, and that was the size. The Haversack was pretty small and it couldn't fit a lot of items, but as I mentioned before in this video, that can actually be an upside. Giving soldiers such a small bag made sure that they only carried the bare necessities and weren't overloaded with unnecessary equipment. Later in World War II, some soldiers were issued the M1943 pack. That pack did have some improvements, but it was much larger, and a lot of soldiers actually complained that it was too big and bulky and they didn't need to carry that much stuff. That M1943 pack didn't last long, and they quickly went to a 2-pack system where a soldier could wear both of the packs if they needed to carry a lot of stuff, or they could just wear one of the 2 packs when they needed to travel light. Item number 3. The Airborne Leg Bag. The Airborne Leg Bag is infamous due to its use by US paratroopers on D-Day. The leg bag was a British design, and it was actually a very smart one if you ask me. At least in theory. The idea was that before your jump, you could strap this big ass bag to your leg and stuff whatever you needed inside. That would help paratroopers carry more equipment, which was very important because these guys were jumping behind enemy lines and didn't know when they would be resupplied. Then they would jump out of the plane with this heavy bag on their leg and lower the bag to the ground before they landed. So in theory, you would jump out of the plane and your chute would open. Then you would pull a quick release cord that would detach the leg bag from your leg. Then the bag would just be hanging from your parachute harness by a rope. After that, you would slowly slide the rope through this friction handle attached to your parachute harness, and that would lower the rope down. You would keep doing that until it was about 15 or 20 feet below you. Then this big heavy bag with all your stuff inside it would hit the ground just before you did, which would lessen the weight on your parachute and slow you down just before you landed. That way you didn't have to hit the ground with all that weight attached to you, which could make the landing much more rough. Here's my friend Keith from Stand in the Door 1944 to give a brief demonstration on how these bags were designed to work.
So the infamous British leg bag. So these were being used by members of the 506th on D-Day with rather negative results. But the major reason for that is not so much of the design issue of the bag itself, but rather that the troopers of the 506th were not being given proper instruction on how to actually deploy one of these bags on a parachute jump. So as we look at the back part of this bag, we can see the 2 straps that are going to be the actual attachment points to attach this bag to a paratrooper's leg. And for today's demonstration, we're going to be using just a Corcoran jump boot to display what this actually looked like on a paratrooper. So when a paratrooper went to actually make his exit from the aircraft, he would be holding on to this D-ring here. He would make his exit, and he would actually hold on to the leg bag as he fell away from the aircraft. Then whenever he finally felt his opening shock from his parachute, he'd be able to look up, check his canopy, make sure that his canopy was in good shape, and then he could work on deploying this leg bag. So as the paratrooper would be holding on to this white linen lanyard, he would lift up on that, and there are 2 cotter pins that are attaching these 2 straps here. So as he would lift up on this, those 2 pins would be pulled, and it would allow the leg straps to completely separate from the bag, and then would allow the actual leg bag to separate from the paratrooper. In which case, the only thing that is holding this leg bag up at the moment is this letdown rope. So this paratrooper would hold on tightly to this rope, and it would slowly deploy as he's squeezed onto that anti-friction sleeve, and the rope would simply deploy out of this small pouch on the front of the bag.
Thanks, Keith. You guys can see more from Keith by subscribing to Stand in the Door 1944 on YouTube. He posts a bunch of really cool World War II airborne stuff there. So those leg bags had a really slick design, but for US paratroopers, the implementation of this bag ended up being almost a total failure. I've heard that British paratroopers actually had great success using this bag, and that's why the US wanted to adopt it in the first place. But if British paratroopers liked it so much, why did US soldiers end up hating it? Well, for starters, they implemented these bags at the last second. Most US paratroopers were given these bags just as they were getting ready to jump for D-Day. That means they didn't get to use these bags during any of their training, and that made a lot of soldiers overload these bags with way too much stuff, making them way heavier than they should have been. The jump conditions on D-Day were also not typical. Many planes were traveling way faster than they were supposed to be when the paratroopers jumped, and that meant there was more prop blast from the planes and a much harder opening jolt when your parachute deployed. When those factors combined, the heavy jolt from your parachute opening and a leg bag that was way too heavy, it was not good news for the soldiers who were using these bags. The jolt from the parachute's opening was often enough to rip the bag off of a paratrooper's leg and sever the rope that was meant to be used to lower it to the ground. That meant many soldiers lost all of their important equipment they had put in these bags as soon as they exited the plane, and for a lot of them, this included their weapon. This problem was depicted in the show Band of Brothers when Dick Winters lost his leg bag along with his weapon during the jump. Here's what the real-life Dick Winters had to say about these leg bags in an interview with John Payne.
The anti-aircraft's coming up and the planes are starting to take evasive action. We're flying far too fast, and the opening shock just tore the rope, ripped the rope, and the bag went on its way, and so that everybody who jumped with one, nobody landed with one.
Some soldiers actually had the opposite issue and they couldn't detach the bag from their leg when they needed to. One soldier said that because his bag was way too heavy, it slid too far down his leg and then he couldn't reach the quick release tab to detach the bag. Other soldiers dropped so low to the ground that they just didn't even have time to release the bag before they hit the ground. This was the case for Dick Knudsen, who can be seen in this photo with his bazooka tucked inside of a leg bag. Knudsen didn't have time to release the bag from his leg before hitting the ground, which caused him to impact much harder than expected, breaking his pelvis. Knudsen had to lie on the battlefield for days with a broken pelvis before somebody finally found him and got him medical attention. These leg bags did end up seeing more use after D-Day with US and Commonwealth paratroopers, but with more success than was seen on D-Day. I've even heard that a new improved version of the bag that fixed a lot of the issues experienced on D-Day was given to US paratroopers for Operation Market Garden, but unfortunately I couldn't find a lot of information about that improved style bag. Landing on D-Day was already dangerous enough without immediately losing all of your equipment and your weapon, and whether you blame the downfall of these bags on the bag's design itself, the high aircraft speeds, or the lack of training, it's clear to see why paratroopers hated these leg bags. Item number 4. CC2. If you're not a military history nerd like I am, there's a good chance that you have no idea what CC2 even is. It isn't discussed as often when talking about World War II uniform history, but it is a very important part of history, and soldiers hated it. CC2 is the name of a chemical that was used to treat soldiers' uniforms in World War II to make them resistant to chemical weapons. Maybe I'm cheating a little bit by including a clothing treatment on a list of pieces of gear that soldiers hated, but I don't care. It's interesting enough that I'm putting it on here anyway. This anti-chemical weapon treatment was not put on all uniforms all the time, but it was done at times where there was a higher perceived risk of the enemy using chemical weapons, so mainly before major operations. When we talk about chemical weapons like poison gas, people often think about gas masks and trying to avoid breathing them in, but a lot of these chemical weapons were also designed to irritate people's skin. The Army implemented a lot of different methods to prevent gas from contacting soldiers' skin. One of them was implementing a protective cover that soldiers could pull over themselves in the event of a gas attack. They also made modifications to uniforms, like adding extra flaps to seal off the cuffs and collars of uniforms where gas could get in. And of course, like we're talking about now, they started treating uniforms with CC2 to seal up the fabric so that chemical weapons couldn't make it between the fibers and contact a soldier's skin. CC2 was a very waxy, oily substance, and uniforms were typically mixed in a big vat of the stuff to make sure they got coated. This was not done at the factories where the uniforms were made. It was usually done much later, sometimes with soldiers even needing to hand in their uniforms so they could be treated with this chemical and then given back. This stuff was nasty, and it definitely did a good job of sealing up the uniforms, but it also left them with an uncomfortable waxy feeling that got rid of all the breathability of the fabric. Wearing a CC2 treated uniform feels like you're wearing a garbage bag. It seals in all the heat and it makes you sweat like crazy as soon as you start moving. Here are some really interesting quotes from World War II soldiers about these CC2 impregnated uniforms that I found in a neat article by Foxhole Fashion. Joseph S. Baylock, 20th Field Artillery. We decided that our impregnated clothes we had on were beginning to burn us and that it was a good chance to change our impregnated clothes at the next hedgerow. Spencer Wurst, 505th PIR. All our clothes were chemically impregnated to protect us against gas attacks. They were very, very uncomfortable because no moisture could evaporate through the cloth. In hot weather, they acted like a rubber raincoat. You can identify CC2 treated uniforms in original photos because the process gave the uniforms a darker color and left a white residue on the surface of the fabric. Oftentimes, World War II reenactors like myself will try to mimic this process on our uniforms by applying wax or some other treatment to the fabric, and that gives the fabric that waxy feeling and leaves a white residue on the fabric just like you see on those impregnated uniforms in the photos. Like that one quote mentioned, CC2 made it so that water couldn't pass through the fabric of the uniforms, which caused some issues for certain soldiers landing on the beaches of Normandy. 29th ID vet Russell Stover is quoted as saying, "Reaching the sand, I tried to run but found it was very difficult. My impregnated pant legs were filled with water. The extra weight took its toll, and about halfway in, I fell in the sand exhausted." Since troops hated these CC2 treated uniforms so much, they found some creative ways to avoid wearing them. It's reported that some paratroopers of the 506 dusted their uniforms with foot powder to give them that white powdery residue look that was left by the CC2 treatment. That way nobody would notice that they never submitted their uniforms to be treated with the chemical. Troops in North Africa sometimes just discarded their CC2 treated items, as noted in this 1943 report that I found in an article by the Smiley GI. It says impregnated clothing was issued to troops only to be carelessly abandoned. Soldiers in Normandy commonly boiled their CC2 treated uniforms in large pots of water to remove the chemicals from the fabric. Of course, chemical weapons were never used against the US in World War II, so these preparations didn't end up being necessary in the end, but when it comes to chemical weapons, I'd rather be safe than sorry. Item number 5. The M1 helmet. Unlike some of the other items on this list, I think the hate for this is unwarranted. Overall, the M1 helmet was pretty well liked, but it did have one feature that soldiers hated: the chin strap. Many soldiers during World War II were convinced that their M1 helmet could kill them if they buckled the chin strap under their chin. The main explanation for this was that if an explosion went off nearby, the concave shape of the M1 helmet would capture the blast and be shot upward, causing the chin strap to break your neck or even rip your head off. In my opinion, that was a total myth. I think any blast that was close enough to you to shoot your helmet off with enough force to break your neck would certainly kill you anyway. The shockwave alone from an explosion that powerful is probably going to leave you in itty-bitty pieces, so I don't think worrying about your chin strap being buckled was really necessary. There are other versions of this myth too, like pretty much the same thing, but if a bullet ricochets off, it could have the force to break your neck, or that if an enemy snuck up behind you, they could grab your helmet and use it to break your neck, or slit your throat, or pull you over, something like that. That one seems possible, I guess, but it's still probably safer to have your helmet strapped on so that it's protecting your head. I've also heard people say this was because if you jumped into water with your helmet strapped, it could tug on your chin and break your neck or something like that. But most soldiers weren't jumping into deep water all the time. I think if you were going to do that, you could just unbuckle it and then jump. I don't think that one's really applicable to most situations. This myth about the chin strap being dangerous wasn't just a localized thing. It spread throughout the whole military, and in some cases, orders were even issued telling soldiers not to use their chin strap. Here's an order passed down on July 2nd, 1944 that instructs soldiers on how to wear their helmet. When personnel are likely to be subjected to blast, the chin strap of the steel helmet will not be fastened under the chin. Casualties in North Africa and Italy included men whose necks were broken due to the upward thrust of concussion inside the helmet, the chin strap having been buckled under the wearer's chin. The chin strap will habitually be worn buckled around the rear of the helmet just above the rim. The headband of the helmet liner will be adjusted to the wearer's head to fit snugly and aid in holding the assembled helmet and liner in place without fastening the chin strap under the chin. I would argue that it's likely much more dangerous to wear your chin strap unbuckled than it is to have it buckled. Check out this photo of two sailors on Utah Beach diving for cover as a bomb drops nearby. One of them is trying to hold his helmet on while the other's helmet flies off. When a bomb is dropping, that's probably the most important time to have a helmet on your head, and if it's flying off your head every time you dive for cover, that kind of defeats the purpose of wearing a helmet. There was also a report given by the 1st Battalion 180th Infantry Regiment stating that the leather chin strap on the liner was the culprit for some deaths, even when the thick web chin strap was strapped around the back of the helmet as ordered. The report reads, "We have never had any casualties from broken necks as a result of men having their heavy web helmet chin straps down during bombing and shell fire. But we did have several casualties from the light leather chin strap in the liner. It is a 7th Army order to keep the heavy strap fastened at the back of the helmet, but a number of our men wore the light liner strap around their chins. In several cases, the helmets were blown off and the thin straps strangled the men before they could be assisted or help themselves. They were probably groggy from the concussion and unable to loosen the straps that were cutting off their windpipes. We actually lost 6 men this way and they had not a mark on them. After that, we cut the liner straps off in this battalion." That one seems a bit more feasible because they're talking about this little liner strap getting wrapped around your neck and strangling you, not being forceful enough to break your neck or rip your head off. I guess I could see that happening if your helmet got knocked back far enough in a blast and this was caught around your neck, but I do kind of find it hard to believe that 6 different men in that group all had the exact same thing happen to them and died in the same way. Of course, it's impossible to know how accurate those reports are, and if you did find a dead body with the liner strap wrapped around the soldier's neck, it would be easy to conclude that that's what killed them, when in reality they could have been killed by a blast, concussion, or a number of other things. The Army was well aware of this myth, and whether or not they believed it was true, they knew they needed to do something to get soldiers to start buckling their helmets again. So they introduced the new T1 helmet strap. The clasp from the T1 strap could be retrofitted on existing M1 helmet straps, and the clasp would break open if more than 15 pounds of force were applied to the helmet strap. This meant that in theory, if this myth were true and you had your helmet clasped under your chin, the strap on the helmet would break before it could break your neck or cause any harm to you. Thinking that the strap on your own helmet is going to kill you would definitely be concerning to soldiers, and it's understandable why so many of them didn't buckle their helmet straps given the prevalence of this myth. I think it's safe to say that soldiers hated these straps considering they were convinced it could get them killed. And it does make me wonder how many soldiers were killed by preventable head injuries after having their helmet fall off because they didn't have it buckled. Alright, that's all 5 items on this list. Let me know in the comments which one was most surprising to you guys. I'm thinking about switching gears and covering some of the gear that soldiers loved the most during World War II, but let me know what you think. Don't forget to go download World of Warships through the first link in the bio and use the code Wisconsin to get your free starter pack. Thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next one.